Good morning, and we will be doing lesson 10.5, factoring x squared plus bx plus c. This is on page 595, but we will also be doing 10.4 along with this because they're very connected. I like to teach 10.5 first and then move to 10.4. So to begin, we're not going to look at the first example. I'm instead going to go over to example 2 because I kind of jump into, they break it down a little bit more than I do. So I'm going to just jump right in with x squared minus 5, what was it? 5x plus 6. Now, we have been working with quadratics now in the previous chapter, chapter 9, and now in chapter 10. And what we are trying to do is think through what these look like on a graph, how to figure out the main goal, which was where they cross the x-axis. And this particular exercise knowledge is going to lead us to the third method for finding out where they cross the x-axis. So what we need to do is, when you think about factoring, you think about breaking a number apart. So if we were to start with 36 and look at all the different multiples, 1 times 36, 2 times 18, 3 times 12, 4 times 9, 6 times, I'm 6 times 6. I think that's probably everything. I hope I didn't forget something in there. But then we can break these out even more into 2 times 3 and 2 times 3. And we can really begin to kind of pick the number apart into much smaller fragments. Well, we're going to do the same thing with this big guy. This big equation, we're going to pick him apart. And I have told students before, it's like there's this big family. They're moving into a new house, and we are going to put them in individual rooms. And these little sets of parentheses are the individual rooms that we have for the family. There's 2 parents. So one of those parents goes to each room to manage the kids. But then we have to decide how these other numbers are going to come about. How do we get the other things into the parentheses? And so I probably picked a bad one to start with here, but we'll keep going with it. We've got to consider a couple things. First, we have to consider the signs and where they're going to go. And we have to consider the breakdown of the number 6, the factors of 6. So I'm going to bring my 6 down here, and I'm going to break this apart. 1 times 6, 2 times 3, and then that's where we are stopped. Now the second, I guess the third thing that I want to do, and I'm going to go through this problem, and then I'm going to write down the steps for you. But the third thing I want to do is I want to figure out, I'm going to place one of these combinations up there in the parentheses. So I'm either going to place the 1 times 6 or the 2 times 3. But I want to look at this, and I want to figure out which one of these can get me to 5. This is my clue. This middle piece is my clue. I want to figure out which one of these can get me to 5, either adding it or subtracting it. Well, unfortunately, both of these can get us to 5. And I'm going to, one of them may work, one of them may not if I put it in. But I'm going to put in the 2 and the 3. Because I know that I can get it to come up to 6. Now, I'm also going to play with the signs. So in order to get a positive here, I've got to have 2 negatives. And so it might work, it might not. the very last step in all of this is that I've got to go through and solve it to make sure. So I'm going to have x times x, x squared, minus 2, or let's do that last, to minus 3x, the inner minus 2x, and the negative 2 times negative 3 is going to be plus 6. So it indeed does work. X squared minus 5x plus 6. All right, so that's the introduction. We're doing something like this, and I'm going to take you through the steps now. So what I want you to do is to take a sheet of paper. We're going to pick a little bit easier one. And so let me hop over here. We're going to do x squared plus 4x plus 3. So the first step, well, the first and second are kind of interchangeable. First step, you want to write your equation. So you want to write it out, make sure it was written correctly from the book, whatever. The second step is draw the parentheses. If you're taking a test and you know that you need to have something factored out, and you don't have the parentheses even drawn there with possibilities of the numbers that go in, then you're not understanding where we eventually want to get. The goal is to factor, and that means parentheses. Factoring equals parentheses with the quadratic equation. The third step we want to do is to begin to fill in the blanks. We can't do any checking, solving, or any other steps until we have filled in those blanks. Here's a blank, here's a blank, here's a blank, here's a blank, and then we have the sign in the middle. So you've got 6 blanks you have to fill in. Well, for the x squared that has a 1 in front of it, it's always going to be just x and x. So if you don't have another number here, this should be a given. Should be pretty easy to fill in. I'm going to erase this so that you don't think it's a 0. And then to fill in the other numbers and the signs, we have to do a little bit of work. So this is where we have got to look at the C. Remember the C? A, B, C. We've got to look at the C piece of the equation. And so when we look at the C, we have a 3. And when we break that apart, the only thing we're going to get is 1 and 3, which is not have any other factors. So I'm pretty comfortable now taking the 3, taking the 1, and popping them in. And right at this moment, it probably doesn't matter where I put them. It is going to matter when we get to more difficult problems and when we have positives and negatives. But for today, enjoy that it's easier and just plop them in. Everything is positive in my quadratic, so that means everything's going to be positive down here too. And so when I say factor a quadratic, this is what I mean. Factoring equals parentheses. Factoring equals parentheses. It means an x here and an x there. It means a whole number here and here. And remember, when you FOIL it, then you're coming up with this middle number. The last step is to determine the signs. That was pretty easy at the moment. So I want you to take a minute, hit a pause, write these steps down. Remember, if we have steps, if we have tools to use, then we make so much more progress because we're not sitting there going, I don't know how to do this. If you have your steps, your index card right in front of you, then you can figure out how to do it. It becomes very easy. So take a minute, pause it, and write these down, and then we're going to do another example where we have to work a little harder to figure out what the sign is going to be. So remember, our goal in life at the moment, at least in this chapter, is to factor. What is factoring equal? It equals parentheses. What is your answer going to look like? That. If you think it could look like anything else, you're wrong. It's going to look like this. And we are going to do a little bit more challenging. We are going to look at, if you have your book, page 597, number 15. And we're going to have x squared plus 8x minus 20. Yes, that's right. And we know we're going to have to start plopping things in here so we can start filling in the blanks. We've drawn our parentheses. We've written and checked our equation to make sure we wrote it correctly. And now we can start filling in the blanks. Well, I know I'm going to put the x and the x. I'm also going to observe my signs. I've got a positive and a negative. So that's going to throw a little bit of a curveball. I call these the jigsaw puzzles of math because you have to try different pieces in different places to see how they work. You might plop numbers in and signs in and they're not working. So you have to go to a different combination. But before we can even get there, we have to look at our C, and we have to figure out all of the multiples of 20. 1 times 20, 2 times 10, nothing with 3, 4 times 5, and that's going to be it. So we have several choices. It's really nice if you only have one choice, but when you have a couple of them, then you have to do a little bit more mental math. So now what I want to do is I want to take a look at these to determine which one of these, let me write this down, which one will get me to my clue, which is this guy. So 8. Which one will get me to 8? I can add or I can subtract, but which one will get me to 8? Now if I look at 1 and 20 and I add it and subtract it, I'm going to get 19 and 21. Nowhere even near. If I add 2 and 10, I get 12. But if I subtract 2 from 10, I get 8. This one could work. Now I suggest that you try all of them just to make sure you don't have a couple options. 4 and 5. Well, if I subtract, I get 1. If I add, I get 9. So neither of these will work. So I'm left with the 2 and 10. So I know that my 2 and my 10 are the numbers that are going to go here and here. I don't necessarily know the order, so I'm just going to put them in. And now is where I start my jigsaw puzzle. I've also got a negative 20, which means I'm going to have a positive and a negative. 2 positives equals a positive for C. 2 negatives equals a negative for C. But a positive and a negative will give you the negative for C, which is what we need. So I think I said all that right. 2 positives is going to make a positive for C. 2 negatives is going to make a positive for C. If I said that wrong, forgive me. But the negative and the positive will give us this negative. So I need to stick in the negative and the positive. So I'm just going to stick them in, see what happens, see if it comes out. If it doesn't come out, then I just reverse them. So it's not a difficult jigsaw puzzle at the moment, but it does require playing around a little bit. So what we want to do is multiply all of this to see if it comes out. So I'm going to erase this. We'll remultiply. And we're going to end up with x times x is x squared. Check, check. The outer portion, the negative 20, check. Now I'm going to do the x times the 10. So I'm going to have plus 10x minus 2x. And what do I get? I get 8x in the middle. And that indeed is a check as well. And it's a positive 8x. So that was right, the way that I chose my signs. So you've got several things that you need to check and make sure that you do correctly. Okay, next what we want to do is I want to go back in time to 10.4. And you will notice that the title of that chapter is Solving Quadratic Equations in Factored Form. Now, we've already worked with quadratic equations, and we know that we're looking for where it crosses the x-axis. We can solve that by graphing. That's the first method. We can solve it by using the quadratic formula. That's the second method. The third method is using these parentheses, is using the factored form, the title, factored form. So now I'm going to take each of these, the x minus 2 and the x plus 10, and very simply, they're going to tell me where this guy crosses the x-axis. I'm going to set both of them to 0. So that's how it was presented to us in the beginning. And then I'm going to do my math. I'm going to add 2 to both sides, and I'm left with x equals 2. I'm going to subtract 10 from both sides, and I will be left with x equals negative 10. So I could have either put this on the graph, I could have used the quadratic formula, or I can now use the factored form, and I can tell you where it is crossing the x-axis. Here's 2, here's negative 10. I know that's a terrible drawing, but it's the same answer I would have gotten with one of those other two methods. So that's where 10.4 and 10.5 work together, and why I like to teach them together. Okay, we're going to do one more, and we're actually going to do it from 10.4. Let me just point one thing out. You can also have x cubed plus maybe 3x squared plus 4x or whatever. And those could also break down into parentheses, but 3 sets of parentheses. And you are going to see that on page 589. The example there shows you 3 sets of parentheses. 2x plus 1, this is example 3, 3x minus 2, and x minus 1. All 3 of those are set to 0, and you get 3 answers. Here is what the shape would look like. And we're not working with this shape, but you see that there are 3 places where it crosses the x-axis. We are not doing that. They're just showing you that it doesn't matter how many sets of parentheses you have. You set them to 0, and you get an answer for where x is crossing the x-axis. So we are going to do a problem, and we're going to take it all the way through. So we're solving for the x, and I'm just going to pick another one. Let's do x squared plus 5x minus 14. X squared plus 5x minus 14. Now, ultimately, I want to solve. Where does this cross the x-axis? I could graph it. We know how to do that. I could use quadratic formula. I know how to do that. Well, now we know how to factor. And that just means when I see the word factor, it equals parentheses. So don't forget that. So I'm going to draw my little parentheses. That's first or second step, depending on what you do. Then I want to start to fill in. I'm going to put an X. I'm going to put an X. I should always see those things on a test. Even if you don't know the rest, I want to see that, and I want to see some combination of the factoring. And then I need to look at the C. So I'm looking at 14, and I want to go with the multiples. 1 times 14, 2 times 7, and that's where I'm going to get stopped. There's no more after that. It gets harder when you have lots, like if you have a number like 50, 5 times 10, 2 times 25, well, maybe not 50, maybe not, that's not a good one, but some of the, some even numbers that might have lots of multiples. You've got 4 or 5 that you've got to look through. So then the very next step, though, is I want to check each of these. Can 1 and 14 be added or subtracted in some way to get to 5? Well, not on this planet they can't. And then, can 2 and 7 be added or subtracted in some way to get to 5? And yes, 2 and 7 could indeed get to 5. So now I want to pop those two numbers. This is my one that I'm going to use. And I'll just put a little X there. I'm going to put my 7 and my 2. Now, I have got to get to a negative 14, which means I need a positive and a negative. So I've now got to determine where am I going to put the negative, where am I going to put the positive. Well, I need to end up with positive 5. So I kind of need to start with a higher number. So to get a positive 5, I'm probably going to need to make this positive. So we're going to try that. And remember, you've only got 2 options. If you put it in and you're wrong, you just go back and fix it. I'm going to put the positive here and the negative there. And now to determine if I'm right, I do my multiplication. So I'm going to have x squared. I'm going to have the outer 2 minus 2x, the inner 2 plus 7x, and then minus 14 is my last one. And when I put these two together, I do indeed come up with a positive 5x. So all of my elements are correct. So the x plus 7 and the x minus 2, we're almost there with solving this in factored form. These are the two things I'm going to set to 0. So I'm going to put x plus 7 equals 0. And I'm going to put x minus 2 equals 0. And when I do my math, I'm going to end up with x equals negative 7, because I have to subtract it from both sides, and x equals positive 2, because I have to add it to both sides. On the graph, let me do that, and something like this. Here's the 2, here's the negative 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 1, 2. That's all that means. They're all related. So your answer for 5.4 now makes a little bit more sense. What are you coming up with in 5.4? That's why I like to teach, not 5.4. That's why I like to teach 10.5 first and then 10.4. So if you take a look at the examples, follow the steps, you should not have any problems with these two chapters. The problems are going to start when we are adding a number in the A space. If we put a 3 there or something like that, then we've got a number, we've got another number we've got to play with. But we're not going to do that till next week. You're actually going to try. You've got today, tomorrow, Friday that you're working with these to see how well you're doing with those. And then by next week, we will start to add some other elements to this. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you next week.